Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to my channel. This week I'm going to be taking a look at a new software application available for both Mac and Windows called PureRAW. PureRAW is a pre-processing application. It is the first step with your straight out of camera RAW files before you import those RAW files into Lightroom, into Photoshop, into Capture One. PureRAW demosaics, denoises, sharpens, fixes chromatic aberration, distortion, vignette, and then spits out new linear RAW files for you to open in Lightroom, Photoshop, Capture One, whatever RAW editor you're using in order to do all additional color grading and post-processing work. DxO PureRAW doesn't touch any of that stuff. PureRAW just basically gives you a better, more optimized, straight out of camera RAW file for you to be working with. Before we get started here, a few important points. First being, DxO PureRAW is a paid application that is available for both Mac and Windows, and they offer a 30-day free trial that you can download and kick the tires. Second, DxO provided me with a copy of PureRAW for the purposes of making this review, of writing a blog post, and for providing feedback. Third point, DxO PureRAW is unfortunately not compatible with Fuji X-Trans sensors. However, if you have RAW images captured with just about anything else, it should work fine. As a matter of fact, I even tried some drone images shot using a DJI Mavic Pro 2 or Mavic 2 Pro, whichever it is, and they worked great. You'll see the results of that in this video. All right, let's jump into PureRAW and take a look. The user interface of this application could not be simpler. It is so basic and stripped down. You don't need to read instructions or a manual or anything like that. Let's drag in some files here. Now, I took the liberty of creating a folder of images here that were shot using different cameras, different lenses from different years, different times of my life. And I'm just going to drag all these in. Now, when you add RAW files, PureRAW scans the metadata of the RAW files and it checks to see what camera you used, what camera and lens combination you use, and it will alert you if it doesn't have the requisite camera correction and lens profile that it needs in order to work its magic and do its thing. So now it's downloaded, click Save. Next step is to come up here and click on Process Photos. Now this row up here at the top of the modal, this is where you choose a RAW processing method. And this is really important because there are 3 modes here, and depending on which mode you choose will depend on the results that you get. There are 3 to choose from. There is an HQ method, a prime method, and a deep prime method. Now, HQ is the weakest of the 3. It focuses on sharpening, lens corrections, vignette, fixing distortion, things like that, but it doesn't touch noise reduction quite as much. Then you get into prime, it starts to go after noise a bit more. And then you have deep prime, which is the most aggressive of the 3. That has the strongest noise reduction and the strongest sharpening. The next row down here, this is where you choose the output format. Now you can choose JPEG if you just wanted to create JPEGs, but remember, it's not going to change exposure, white balance, color. It's not going to do anything. It's just giving you a more optimized RAW file. So I'm not entirely sure why someone would click on JPEG, but it's there if you want it for some reason. Then you have a choice of where you want these new RAW files to go. You can do a custom folder, or it'll automatically create a DxO named folder in whichever folder it is that you're using, wherever these RAW files live. So let's just go ahead and I'm going to leave that as the DxO folder option, and then we just click on Process. And then down here at the bottom of the window, you get a progress bar, and it also tells you how long this is going to take. So while this is running, something else you should know about PureRAW is that in this process, it is creating new linear RAW files, which are different than, it's like a different RAW format than the straight out of camera RAW files that your camera creates. Those files are also larger, at least with the ones that I've been creating here. They've all been on average somewhere around 3 times larger than the straight out of camera RAW images. Additionally, PureRAW is tapping into a database of camera and lens calibration data that DxO has been building for nearly 2 decades now. And it includes hundreds, if not thousands, of different camera body and lens combinations. And on top of that, they've also been scanning millions of images as well for use with all of this data. And then through this technology they call Deep Prime, they're able to use artificial intelligence to not only know how to address particular issues when it comes to chromatic aberration, to noise, to vignette and distortion and all of that. But there's also some intelligence going on behind the scenes. So it knows how to apply noise reduction in a thoughtful way, in a way that's not going to be too heavy-handed, something that's going to look correct and is going to work well. And so they're taking like a very AI data-centric approach to this process of creating raw files, which I think is really interesting. All right, so processing is now done, and now we have the option of go to Finder, or we can view the results, or we can export to. Now, my options here include Lightroom Classic and Photoshop 2021, and I also have the option here of exporting the original raw files as well, if I have yet to import these into Lightroom, for example. So that's something else you can do. We're not going to do that right now, because what I found when testing the software is that you can see the difference between your original straight out of camera raw files and the optimized raw files created by PureRAW much easier in PureRAW than using Adobe Lightroom. So we're just going to skip this for right now. So let's begin with this one here. This is actually a drone image. This was captured using a DJI Mavic 2 Pro in one of my most absolute favorite places on earth. This is out in the Badlands of Utah. Incredible landscape. And what you're looking at now, this is the newly optimized raw version, but you can't truly appreciate what's going on here until you look at the before and after, until you look at the straight out of camera raw and compare it to the new one. So to do that, there are two options here. There is one that is a toggle. That's the original raw file. And then this is the new one that was created by PureRAW. Then they have a split screen view here, which you can slide back and forth. Now let me go back to 1:1 so you can really see what's going on here. Now, what I notice when I look at these images, one, it is fixing the distortion in the sensor, because there is a fair amount of lens corrections, a lot of lens corrections actually, that need to be done with drone photography. And the other thing I notice is, these details with these veins in the earth down here, and all the little just pebbles and rocks. Well, this is from what is this? Probably like 500 feet from above. These are probably boulders, really. They're probably not pebbles. But you get what I'm talking about. And you can just see how much more detail is being pulled out of that raw file by PureRAW, especially in the corners. The corners look completely different. Let me go back out to this view again and toggle the on and the off. It does really a fantastic job of correcting those problems. All right, let's take a look at a DSLR image. Now, this was shot using a Canon 5D Mark IV with a Canon 100 to 400 millimeter telephoto lens. Not the sharpest lens in the world. Like the Canon 70 to 200 millimeters, a better telephoto lens when it comes to sharpness. But the 100 to 400, it gets the job done. If you're looking for like a really deep telephoto lens to, just really zoom in far, great lens for that. It's just not quite the sharpest. So let me go 1:1 here. And we're going to do a split view to see the difference. So left is straight out of camera, right is PureRAW. And I'm going to go back and forth here so you can see the difference. And not only is it correcting some of that distortion, but you can see that it is finding detail. It is finding information in here to be pulling out. And I think it's doing a really nice job. Let me come back out here to the full view so you can see it. That's before. And that's after. And yeah, nice looking. It almost seems to be getting a little bit brighter. And I think that's because the vignette is being removed. Let's try a different one here. This is Dolomites, Northern Italy. And let's go to 1:1 here. This one should be interesting. Let's do the before and after. Straight out of camera on the left. PureRAW on the right. Now, I'm laughing because I'm looking at these trees down here. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. Maybe you need to go full screen with your player or something, but there is a very noticeable difference. There is clarity and detail that is coming out of those trees. It's almost like PureRAW knows that they're trees and is really doing a pretty awesome job of pulling that detail out. Okay, let's try something different. Now, this image here, this was shot again in Italy. This was actually in Trani. the small town of Atrani that's right next door to Amalfi. You've probably heard of the Amalfi Coast. There was a scene in the boat and the yacht in Tenet. If you've watched the Tenet movie, that was on the Amalfi Coast. Christopher Nolan knows how to pick a location. Now, this one should be interesting because there's a lot of detail. There's a lot of architectural detail going on here. And this is that's the optimized version. So this is before. This is straight out of camera. This was shot using a Leica M, by the way. And that's the before. And then that's the after. It's definitely bringing some detail out. Especially all these tiny little, all this little detail in the windows and the roof lines here. Really, really nice. So here's another example. These are the Wah-Weep hoodoos here, which I would love to go back and photograph someday. So this is straight out of camera, raw here. Now, pay attention to this corner down here in the lower left. I'm going to scroll over the PureRAW version. And I mean, it's pretty amazing. I mean, the detail that it's especially pulling out in this grass down in here, and the fact that it's correcting that vignette and fixing some of that loss of sharpness in the corners. Let me come back over here again. And yeah, all right, let me toggle this. So straight out of camera, and that's what PureRAW. Straight out of camera, and then PureRAW. There's one more image I want to share with you here in PureRAW. And what I decided to do was dig into my archives and find like a really old image, something that was not only taken with an older digital camera, but one that was also shot in a very challenging environment. And I came across an archive of images that I shot at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, like 10 years ago. And I shot a bunch of bands when I was there. And one of the shows I went to was an Ariel Pink show. And this was a Vice show. And some of these images ended up in Vice, which was, hey, that was pretty cool. Well, this is the straight out of camera raw file here. And I mean, just look at all the noise over his shoulder. And then let me go in 1:1 actually, and take a look at the skin tone here on his cheek. I mean, see how splotchy it is, all these reds and greens. And I mean, the demosaicing that happened here, it just didn't do a particularly good job. I mean, the skin tone just really looks pretty bad. And also note that there is, I mean, check this out. There's like a dead pixel down here. I don't know if you're gonna be able to see that, but there's like a green dead pixel down here on the microphone. So let's check out PureRAW and see what it does with the image. Now, immediately, like what I'm looking at here is the skin tone right here. I mean, look at how much all that red and green, all that noise has been pulled out, and it looks way, way better. And you can also see like a lot of detail going on in the hair as well, much sharper. And I mean, not to mention the noise over shoulder. Look how smooth it is now. And it doesn't look plasticky, right? I mean, that was one of the things I was kind of worried about, was that the noise reduction would be too strong and it would come out just looking, just, when you overdo it, right? And I thought it might, but from what I can tell, it does a really nice job. And it also fixed that dead pixel. How about that, right? Actually, it looks like I had a few dead pixels down there. And man, you can really see it. I mean, like, look at all the noise in the back of his arm here in these darker areas. And then when we come back over, much, much smoother. So let's toggle the before and after here. And this is before, straight out of camera. And then this is the newly optimized version. And this, I think, is really interesting and perhaps exciting as well for, photographers who have been shooting digital raw photos for a long time. Perhaps someone like you. You may be able to breathe new life into old photos by running them through a newer, more modern demosaicing engine with that artificial intelligence behind it. And you may end up finding some gems in the haystack that you forgot about from long ago. Hey, so this is me from the future. I'm jumping in here because I realized after editing this video that I failed to address a really important question. And I'm sure it's a question some of you probably have watching this. I know I would probably want to know this as well. And that is the question of, can't you do these things in Adobe Camera Raw? Can't you do these things in Lightroom? I mean, because these tools already have denoise, they have sharpening, they have chromatic aberration tools, vignette tools, lens correction profiles, all the things that PureRAW has. So why buy PureRAW? Like, is there really that much of a difference between the two? Well, I pulled up an example here that I think is really interesting. So let's take a look at this. So once again, I went back into my archive to find an old raw image shot using an older camera and under less than ideal conditions. And this image and others from this collection absolutely apply. These were actually shot in Lyon, France. I happened to be wandering around and I stumbled across a building with a door that was just wide open. I went up into it and it was an apartment building and it had this amazing architecture on the inside. But I had to shoot everything handheld because, I wasn't carrying a tripod at the time or anything like that. And I did actually try to go back with a tripod and capture some more images of this place, but it was closed and it was locked up. So I always remember this as being like the place that got away because I was just in and out within a few minutes. Anyway, so this is the image we're going to look at here. So this was shot at 10,000 ISO at 1/80th of a second. And I believe this was with a Canon 6D or 7D. This is a straight out of camera original. You can see how much noise there is. I mean, just tons of noise everywhere. And then this is the processed version. I applied noise reduction to help reduce some of that noise, smooth out some of these tiles and the wall back here. And I also applied a little bit of sharpening, some chromatic aberration fixes, lens corrections, vignette, all that good stuff. And that's pretty much what that looks like. Now, let's compare it to one that was converted using PureRAW. Now, PureRAW is over here on the right side. Adobe Camera Raw is over here on the left. And basically what I tried to do was I tried to emulate the noise reduction in the DxO PureRAW image in the Camera Raw DNG, and by getting the tiles about the same, when it comes to how much noise reduction there was. And the problem, though, is that in doing so, the tiles look pretty good in the Camera Raw version, but it's completely lost all the detail in the grout, like between the tiles. The bicycle detail is now kind of shot as well. And you can see over here in the PureRAW version, see how you can actually see the tread in the tire, and you can't even see that in the Camera Raw version. Not to mention like all this down here, all this concrete detail, that's just completely lost in the Camera Raw version. Let me go over here to this side. And again, you can see just how much of an improvement and how it's actually, like intelligently applied sharpening and brought out detail on the edges of the image, which just do not exist over here in the Camera Raw version. They look very, very different. So, and just look at all see all these weird kind of like discoloration that's happening back here in this Camera Raw. That's probably just some problem with the demosaicing. I'm not exactly sure. And then look how much smoother and more natural and correct the PureRAW version looks. In general, just like I said earlier, you are going to see the best results when you find some older problematic images and convert them using PureRAW. Then you are going to see the most dramatic results, as you can see in these. So, I'm sure YouTube is probably going to do a fantastic job of compressing this 4K video, and you're definitely not going to be able to see the same level of detail that I'm seeing here on my display. But the good news is you can download a 30-day free trial of PureRAW, give it a shot with some of your own images, and see what kind of results you get. Before we wrap up this video, I do have a few additional thoughts about PureRAW that I would like to share for your consideration if you do decide to download a trial or to purchase the software. The first of which is the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, PureRAW creates a linear RAW file that is 3 times larger than your straight out of camera RAW image, which opens up a really interesting dilemma and a question as to, do you keep the straight out of camera RAW image? And if you do, and then you also keep the PureRAW image, and the PureRAW RAW file is the one that you then do all your post-processing work with, well, that means for every RAW image you import, you're essentially quadrupling the amount of disk space that every RAW image is going to require. If you were to keep both the straight out of camera RAW image and the processed RAW image created by PureRAW, which from a content management perspective is a little bit messy and a little problematic when it comes to how much space all those raw files are going to be consuming. The way I'm thinking about PureRAW, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, by the way, as well, if you have some that you would care to share. But the way that I'm thinking about it is that I think PureRAW is the kind of thing that you would use more selectively, not with like an entire card full of images. You would use it for the raw images that you really care about, like your selects, the ones that you really want to process and get the best possible detail out of. Another point to consider here is that with those pure raw DNG files that are created, when you open them up in Lightroom or Photoshop or Capture One, you should not need to apply any additional sharpening, denoising, no lens corrections, no vignette adjustments, none of that, because all of it has already been baked into the raw file. You shouldn't need to do anything more. Which brings up a really interesting philosophical question about workflow, because typically sharpening is the kind of thing that you want to do at the end of a process, because sharpening is dependent on where the photo is seen, whether it's on screen, whether it's on paper. And the fact that the sharpening is baked into that original, into that core raw file, I don't know. I mean, I get it. Like I think it's really impressive, and I think part of the magic behind the results that PureRAW is able to achieve by applying both denoise and sharpening at the moment in which that raw data is being demosaicked is impressive, and it's part of what makes it work. It's part of the magic of the software. At the same time, though, it kind of raises a question of well, maybe there needs to be a fourth mode. Maybe there needs to be another one in there where sharpening isn't as strong, or maybe one where you can pull back some of that sharpening and just focus on denoising and the lens corrections. I think an argument could be made for having an additional mode like that for people who are just a little uncomfortable with the sharpening that is being done. I think that might be nice, because there isn't quite a mode in there right now that suits that purpose. So what do you think? What is your opinion? Have you downloaded PureRAW? Have you tried it? Have you processed some images with it? What kind of results are you getting? Would love to hear your feedback. Would love to hear your opinion. Please feel free to leave a comment below. Thanks to DxO for providing me with a copy of PureRAW for the purposes of this review. And thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video. If you enjoyed the video and you got something out of it, please take the time and give it a thumbs up. And while you're down there, go ahead and subscribe to this channel as well, if you would like to keep in touch with me and you'd like to see more videos like this one in the future. Thanks so much for being here, everyone. See you next time.